So welcome back. In this episode we're looking at some more upgrades to the MFT and some interesting products that have come my way. That sounds interesting, stick around. A couple of weeks ago I published this video looking at the way I'd changed my use of the MFT and introduced you to some products that I was now using, namely some fence dogs that allowed me to simplify the connection of the fence to the table, speed that up, make it more accurate, more repeatable, and some rail dogs that simplified the connection of the Festool guide rail to the MFT as well. And I was discussing with you how they'd made an impact and a change. Now those products came from a company called Benchdog's.co.uk, and Ralph, who runs the company, got in touch. He'd seen the video, was very pleased with what we'd done, and he asked for permission to use that video over on his website so people get to know what the tools are about. Of course I said yes, why would I not? He also mentioned there's other products that I might be interested in, and Ralph was kind enough to send those products over to me for review, and that's what we're going to look at today. Full disclosure, all the products we're going to look at in this video are provided free of charge to the Woodgrafter from Benchdogs.co.uk, and here to show you what those products are. I am a fan, I will be using them, they're incorporated into my workflow, and as always I wouldn't share anything with you that I thought was rubbish, unless of course I told you it was rubbish. So let's have a look at what we got from Ralph. The first thing we got was this Benchdogs.co.uk fence. This is a direct replacement for the Festool fence that I've been using so far, and this one comes in a 1 meter length. There's a longer version of this as well, details on the screen. It comes as part of a kit, and inside the kit you get 2 of the fence dogs that we reviewed in the last episode, and you also get a Flagstop known as the version 4 Flagstop. The reason it's called the version 4 Flagstop is Ralph takes feedback from his end users and is always looking to improve the products, and on that particular version the plastic used in the moulding has been strengthened to stop the captive nut from spinning, so that's why it's the version 4. And as we discussed last time, it comes with a couple of extra bolts should you want to use these fence dogs on the Festool rail. For this we don't need them, it works incredibly well. It also comes calibrated with a reference gauge in millimeters, and I checked this with my steel rule that is my most accurate rule in the workshop, and it's bang on compared to my steel rule. And when I discussed that with Ralph, all these are actually etched, and he checks each and every one with a precision rule to make sure they're accurate before they ship. Not bad. So setting this up is super easy. You can either position the fence dogs in this rail here, so this would lie flat, or you can position it in this orientation and put the fence dogs on the back. Personally, I like the height on this, so I put the fence dogs on the back. They simply slide in to this top channel here. There's one. And there's 2, and then they just obviously slot into any convenient holes on your MFT, and then you can just lock those into position. Now that extra height that you get on these fence dogs means that these black knobs don't catch onto the MFT, and when we were using the Festool fence they were catching, which is why we had those extra bolts that we used. But this is great, so it makes it really easy to reposition these. The fence dogs also come with a 6mm thread in the base of them, and that means if you have any of these clamps knocking around that most of us do, we have Festool kits, they simply screw into the base like that. So that means we can now lock this into position onto the table. The kit also comes with the V4 Flagstop, and that just simply slots into this rail here. Like that, and like any Flagstop that will then flip down and gives you a positioning point for your material, and that gives you repeatable cuts. It comes with this rather ingenious adjusting handle that clears the Flagstop when it's in that position, which means you can quickly tighten that into position. And it also has a positioning function, so you press this button down on the top, that releases a handle, and you can put the handle out of the way, and that is still locked in to position. Ralph also sent over a second flagstop, and I do like having multiple flagstops on these fences. It allows me to set up repeatable cuts on multiple materials, and that's a good investment. So that now gives me a good solid fence for my MFT. Ralph's also provided some of these bench dogs, and these are known as the B-Dog Mini, and you can use these like you would use any typical bench dog to secure a piece of work for putting dominoes in the end of the board, for example. Where these things really come into their own is that they can be used in conjunction with your fence to give you a guaranteed 90-degree cut. And because the fence is relying on the holes for its positioning, and these bench dogs are relying on the holes for its positioning, the rail butts nicely up against those, giving you a guaranteed square. Therefore, any piece of stock underneath your rail, with the rail against the bench dogs and the stock flush against your fence, is now going to give you a 90-degree cut, and that's super fast and super easy. Now, the other reason that these are called the Benchdog Mini is because of their size, the height from the end collar here to the top of the dog. Now, benchdogs.co.uk do a longer version of this, and again, customer feedback was saying when we're using those longer dogs with the Festool rail, the TS55 is catching on the top of those dogs. So the Benchdogs Mini was a response to that customer feedback. Let me show you what I mean. Now, I don't have any of the original bench dogs, but it so happens that the rail dogs that we reviewed last week for the Festool rail are the same height overall as the original bench dog. And I'm just using some of these collars, and we'll look at these collars in a minute, just to emulate what that bench dog would be like. So using the same process, I can drop these into my table and then bring my rail up to that. And so far, everything is looking good. Now, the problem starts when I now come in with my TS55, and can you see? It catches on those dogs. Catches on that dog, and obviously catches on that dog. Now, what that means is, if you're not aware of that and you're trying to cut past that dog, as you touch that, it's going to knock your rail out of square and damage your cut. Now, the Benchdog Minis are designed specifically to alleviate that problem. They're shorter in design. So now when your rail is up against this and your TS55 is coming along, it clears both of those dogs quite happily, and therefore that's a good feature based on customer feedback. Now, there is one thing I don't like about the concept of using a rail flushed up against bench dogs, and it's not to do with the product that Ralph has, it's to do with where the Festool cutting line appears on your MFT table. With my rail lined up against my Benchdog Minis, my cutting line is directly over these holes here, and that means when I'm cutting through the hole. That means where the holes are, there is no support for the material, and therefore the potential for tear out is good. Typically when I'm cutting, I line my cut lines up between a set of holes, so my bench is always supporting the material, and that removes the tear out problem. Bench dogs in general are a great product, and I find them fantastic for supporting material while I'm making cuts with things like dominoes, or just working on the end of the board in general. Now, when you start to use multiple sets of dogs together, you obviously create yourself a square holding pattern, and that's great when you want to do clamping work, where you want to ensure that the various clamping pressures are 90 degrees to each other. So bench dogs are great, just that I'm not a fan with the cutting position that comes from any bench dog. However, what I am a fan of are these guide rail dogs, and you'll notice these guide rails have a different feature on them. They have a collar here. Now, these are known as B collars. The B collar comes in a kit of 2, so you get 2 B collars and an Allen key in the kit. Now the idea of the B-collar is it gives you an adjustable stop position on your rail dog. Therefore you can set the rail dog to the height of the material that you're cutting. Let me show you why that's important. Now I'm just connecting the rail to the MFT in the way I normally would, but there's no B-collars involved. When I come along with a relatively narrow piece of stock, which is not an unusual practice, and put that in there, what happens is the rail slopes down away from the material. So there's a gap here at this end of the material, and that alters the clamping pressure, and that's really not holding that piece of wood at all. So when you come in with your TS55, there's huge amounts of flex and twist in this rail, and as you get to the end here, your saw will knock that piece of wood out of square and it damages the cut. Now the way around that is you normally take a piece of stock of the same thickness and you put that under the other end of your rail, and now that means that your rail is sitting flat on your stock and you can go ahead and make your cut. The B-collars eliminate the need for this second piece of scrap wood. You take your piece of wood, lay it on your rail, take your B-collar, drop it on, and you line the top of the B-collar up with the thickness of the material, and then just nip that into place. And then line your second collar up with that position you've just made and lock that into place. And now those collars have set the height of your material. Put the rail back into the bench, and then that allows the rail to grip the material, and I can go ahead and make my cut. And the TS55 is supported throughout the cut, and that eliminates the need for trying to find an additional piece of stock. And it's a really simple invention. Now what I tend to do, I actually bought some of these as well as the sample that was supplied by Ralph, and I've now got two sets of the rail dogs, and I set them to the material distance I'm using as part of that project. Typically, if you've seen any of my work, it's 18mm and I'm using 12mm ply. So I have one at 18mm and one set at 12mm, and then I just rotate those depending on the stock I am doing. And it's super fast and super easy. Now that means that my TS55 is always supported through the cut, and it means that the rail is doing what it does best, it's gripping that material, and I can change it over quickly, and I always get the accuracy that I'm looking for. So I like those, they're really clever. Now Ralph also makes a device known as a quad dog. I've not got those to show you today, but Peter Millard has done a fantastic review of those over at the 10-minute workshop, so I'll leave a link in the description. Now what a quad dog is, it's like a traditional dog, but it's got a rubber collet round the base, and when you turn the top it expands the collet and it grips into your MFT. So you can pretty much adjust the height of that dog inside your table and you can lock it into position. Now Peter has started to use those in conjunction with the B-collar that we've just looked at. So he takes his piece of stock and he rests his stock up against the dog, and then he flushes it down until the collet is on the top of the stock. He then rotates the top and it gives him a clamping position to secure the wood. So he's quickly batching through things like domino joinery, relying on the clamping pressure of that piece of material. Now that's great because it quickly allows him to reset to the next piece of material. So he's got some clamping force here and he's using it in that way. So it's worthwhile going to check that out as another use for those B collars. The next product I want to show you are known as bench top protectors, and they are a work of genius. They're just so simple. Inside the kit you get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 bench dog protectors. Now these are 3mm discs with a 20mm hole on the back, and the idea of those is you can drop them onto your bench, put your stock on top, and that stock is now held 3mm above the surface. I could take my TS55, set it to the 18mm, thickness of the stock, plus 2mm for clearance, 20mm, and when I made the cut, it would not damage the work surface here. And if you can see this groove here on the table where it's damaged the table, that wasn't a zero clearance cut. That was cutting through an 18mm piece of stock with my TS55 set at 18mm, and you can see it's damaged the top of the MFT. Not a problem, but if you're doing that multiple times, eventually you wear out the MFT. So these things really do work well. The kit also comes with 8 of these small self-adhesive nylon knobbles. I'm not sure what to call them. These add a further 2mm to the height of these, but more importantly, they add grip. So obviously wood is going to slide around on top of an aluminium extrusion, but once you've got that in place, there's friction there, and then that holds that piece of material very firmly indeed. So I can now start to use these things together. I can come in with my bench top protectors, I can position my mini dogs in position, I can put my board on the protectors, which is going to give me additional clamping force, come in with my rail against those dogs, and now I'm set up for very quick and accurate cutting with no movement whatsoever, purely held in place by the resistance on those bench top protectors and the strips that sit underneath your MFT rail, and you can quickly start to make very accurate cuts. Now, although I don't have the zero cut clearance of the MFT top, I'm not cutting through my holes and therefore damaging my holes. So that's a really neat solution, and that's certainly something I could see myself using when I'm doing long rips on the table, where I don't worry too much about tear out. Tear out tends to happen when we go across the grain, not when I go with the grain. So when I'm doing a long rip cut, they're fantastic because I can raise the material 5mm off the workbench, hold it secure on the workbench due to friction, and because we get a generous 8 in that, cutting my 2.5 meter long boards that I often do is not a problem to me. So I love those. Where have they been all my life? Really impressed. Now, the final thing that Ralph sent me over was a small black branded bag, Benchdogs.co.uk, in case you haven't worked out who's providing these things just yet. And this is great. So this is just a useful little place to put the dogs inside and the bench top protectors to keep them all together. So yeah, great, thank you. Now, in case you've not worked it out yet, what Ralph is beginning to create here over at benchdogs.co.uk is a system. It's a number of products that really get the value when you start using them together. And when we use these in conjunction with the MFT, it really starts to give us speed and accuracy and repeatability. And you know that's important in our workflow. So what I now want to do is to bring all that together and show you the way that I would normally use this product set. First thing I want to do is to calibrate the fence to my MFT. So I'll connect my rail dogs with the B collars set at 18mm into my Festool rail. There's one, there's two. And I'll position the rail where it would normally be positioned on my MFT. It's going to be there, and I'll lock that into place. I'm now going to put our fence into position, loosen the fence off and slide it up to the rail. So I'm going to come in with a steel rule and I'm going to line up my 200 mark on my rule with the cutting strip on my rail, which is there. And now I'm going to slide my fence up to the end of the ruler and lock it into position. So I've now set a cutting distance at the edge of my cut here on my plastic splinter guard to the end of my fence. Now that allows me to use this laser edged ruler on here, and because it's all locked in to these fence dogs, that's repeatable. So simply by dropping it back into that same location, that will now be 200mm. and it's that easy to lock the fence in and calibrate it to your MFT table. Now Ralph gets a lot of questions about why don't you create a rail that starts at 200 millimeters and then you could just calibrate it in. And what he's saying is the fence is not just designed for the Festool rail, it works with the Makita rails, the Bosch rails, any rails really that's a track saw. And of course they're not just using the fence on a track system. So Ralph actually does two lengths of this. He does this 1 meter and I think it's a 1.2 meter. I'll put the actual size here just in case I've got that wrong. And what he says is if you want to actually cut this down, buy the 1.2 meter one, and it's not much more money, it's not stupid money at all, and then line it up to your purpose and then cut off at that point. So I could cut this off at 200 millimeters, which is about here, set that 200 millimeters, and then my scale would read accurately. And if I'd bought the 1.2 meter rail, I would still have a full meter rule on my bench. So that's the recommendation. Personally, it seems like a lot of messing for very little return to me, because it's not that hard to add 200 millimeters to the distance that you want to cut, and that's the way that I use it. I now want to lock this in for accuracy, so I'm just going to use these Festool knobs into the base of my fence and I'll lock it in from underneath the table. Now what I'm now going to do, relying solely on that setup, is I'm going to do the 5 cut challenge on this piece of board. Now if you're not familiar with the 5 cut challenge, here's how it works. You make a reference line by cutting off one end of the board. You then put that reference surface against your fence and you make another cut, so that's cut number 2. You then put that reference surface against your fence and make another cut, that's cut number 3. You then put that reference surface against the fence and make another cut, and that's cut number 4. You then put that reference surface against the fence and you're now cutting the first cut that you made, and that's cut number 5. And then you measure the thickness of that material at both ends. If it's the same thickness at both ends, every angle on this is perfectly 90 degrees. So we should therefore be able to get a view of how accurate that setup is to give us that 90 degrees. To make it even harder, we'll take the first cut and then we'll set one of the fences to 300 millimeters. So we should end up with a 4 square board, equal dimensions across the final offcut, and the final board should be at 300 millimeters. Let's give it a go. Hey, excited. I'll also say I've never tried this before, so I do not know what's going to happen. So Ralph, if you're watching, time to be nervous, my friend. Cut number 1, rotate the board, and now I'm going to set my gauge to, rather than 300, I'm going to set this to a distance of 314, which is there, 14 in on this gauge. And that's just to give this reference surface a fighting chance. So I'm going to push it hard into that fence and we'll make the next cut, cut number 2. Cut number 3. Didn't think that through, did I? Just going to bring this back a little bit now to 13. That was cut number 4, and then finally cut number 5. Here's piece number 5. Now if this end is the same thickness as this end, then our piece has passed the 5 cut challenge, and that system is giving me perfect 90 degrees. So I'm setting this to 0, coming in, and that distance is 7.5 7.75 millimeters. Turning it over, coming in 7.70 millimeters. So 0.05 millimeters variance in that piece of material, and that is pretty damn fine. Let's see how we did for size. Remember, we set our flagstop at 130 millimeters, so 130 millimeters plus 200 millimeters should be 330 millimeters, and our board is indeed bang on 330 millimeters. 330 millimeters. What more do you need to say? Let's come in with our digital angle finder and see what that says about things. So I'll zero this down. And we'll square it to the end of this board. I don't know about you, but that is pretty impressive. So I now have a system in my workshop that I can rely on the measurements on my fence for quickly setting those distances and those cuts, and I can rely on the squareness of the MFT using those dogs and that system from benchdogs.co.uk to give me bang on 90-degree accuracy every single time. And I can position that setup anywhere on my MFT. I can move it to this end, I can bring the fence with it, and I'll have that bang on repeatable accuracy as well. There's no play at all in those flags, so I'm getting millimeter perfect measurements from that fence when I take it back to my calibration ruler. So you may be saying to yourself, yes, but this is going to cost me a lot of money, isn't it, Mr. Woodgrafter? Well, let's have a look. The fence itself, with the fence dogs and the 1 meter rule and one of the V-floor flagstops, is 76 UK pounds. The B-Dogs minis are £15 for the pair. An extra flagstop to give you that configuration that I have there is £17.50. The bench top protectors for 8, including those beautiful little nylon stick-ons, £30. And the B collars for a pack of 2 are £16. And to me, that is incredible value for money. And I really do recommend this system. Now, the other thing is that Ralph's not stopped and is continuing to develop the overall system, and there's more great things coming down the line. One of the things he's producing next is a CNC cut MFT top, and that's really exciting. And if you remember in the last video I said, is anybody interested in me creating an MFT table in the workshop so we can see how we build this and at what price point that comes in? Well, the answer is we're going to do it. There was lots of interest. I discussed it with Ralph. He's going to kindly donate one of the tops to the cause, and then we're going to build it around the bench dogs system, and we will see how good that can be. So look out for that. One final thing, bench dogs also make another type of flag, which is a direct replacement for the ones on the Festool Fence. It's as sturdy as the ones I've got on my bench there, and you get the beauty of this whizzy handle, and the price of one of these is £17.50. Can't remember offhand what I pay for an additional one of these, but I'll drop it on the screen when I do the editing. You can compare the two. So it's at least as good as the Festool one. I love this handle. Really makes adjusting it easy and getting the handle out of the way. Much better than this knob, I find. So that's pretty much it. I'm made up with that. I'm getting accuracy of my cuts, 90-degree cuts. We saw that from the digital rule. We did the 5-cut measurement to actually prove that, and it's come out phenomenally well. It was bang on to the millimeter, the size that we wanted. It's fast, it's repeatable, it's quick, it's clean, and boy is it value for money. Hope you found it useful. Thanks for watching. Leave comments below, get in touch, and watch out for the MFT build video. See you very soon. Bye.